What's up, everybody? This is Windy City Gridiron Radio with you, as always, Robert Zaglinski. And today we are going to take more of an X's and O's perspective concerning the Bears and with free agency and the draft season in full swing. Primarily focusing on Matt Nagy's offense. I thought this would be fun to do. I thought this would be fun to do with one of in my mind, more preeminent X's and O's people you can find in football writing, who I am pleased to be joined by Brett Kollman. Brett, what's up?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
A little bit of a sore throat, but I'm powering through. I think I'm doing the heroic thing here. So Brett writes for SB Nation's Battle Red Block. That's for the Houston Texans, but he generally he dabbles around with everybody. I mean, you can pick his brain, and he'll understand every concept. So he's the perfect guy to kind of delve into Matt Nagy's offense, what it's going to mean for Mitch Trubisky, who are drafted free agent fits, which is what we're going to focus on today. And I guess that's the perfect thing to jump right into. So from a general perspective, your terminology, what are like simple offensive concepts we can, because I've kind of coined it as the spread coast, considering Mark Helfrich in tow, and then now you have the spread coast offense. Yeah, some kind of good nomenclature there, and then Brad Childress, an old school West Coast guy. So what are some basic foundational things we can expect?
That's actually a really good term for it, the spread coast, because it's about the closest thing to a true hybrid between West Coast and I guess you can call it, spread. The college spread. There's so many different versions of it, but I mean, the Oregon spread is different than the TCU spread, which is different than the Kansas State spread. But the Oregon spread is kind of its own beast, and when you combine that with the Childress kind of West Coast background. And Nagy himself was an Andy Reid disciple, and Reid has his own kind of hybrid between spread and West Coast that he did in Philly, and then even more in Kansas City with Alex Smith once he kind of got that mobile quarterback. So it's going to be a very unique confluence of ideas. So I don't know if we'll get the full picture of it before we actually see what's on the field. But I think we could be reasonably confident that they're going to take different concepts from every background and kind of blend them together. As far as how that works for Mitchell Trubisky, it's going to be really interesting because how you read an RPO out of the spread is completely different than how you read a traditional West Coast passing concept. In the West Coast offense, every single receiver's route is designed and timed very specifically to be a progression, whether it's a deep to short, a left to right. Some routes are basically dummy routes that are used to open up the true number one target on the play. So it's not always the number one receiver going to be the number one target. You look at things like flanker drive, where pretty much every route in a flanker drive concept is designed to get the flanker open on a drive route coming across the field. It's a great man breaker concept. The Niners ran this with Jerry Rice, and he got thousands upon thousands of yards just with that one concept, because the whole play was designed just to get him open. And so, when you're reading that play as a quarterback, you have to know where to put your eyes in order to help that concept succeed and to have that flanker come open. Whereas you look at the RPO and it's read completely differently. It's kind of more improvisational. Where you might have multiple plays packaged in the same play, and they're not necessarily designed to get each other open, but one way or another, one of them will be open just based on how the defense is aligned. So that one's more reliant on the quarterback, understanding the leverages of the defensive backs, understanding the alignment of the linebackers, what the run fits are, where he should be looking, like who his read is to determine whether or not he's handing it off, whether or not he's passing it. So it's two very different ways of reading a defense and two very different ways of designing an offense, and they can work together. I mean, Kansas City and Philadelphia both proved that this year, but it's very interesting to watch, and I'm very excited to see how they blend all these concepts together because they're so different.
I was actually going to ask, well, I'm already familiar with it, and I know what it is, but if you watch the Super Bowl broadcast, Chris Collinsworth and Al Michaels don't exactly know what an RPO is. So could you kind of for the listeners delve into what exactly it is as opposed to the difference between the West Coast and otherwise?
Yeah, and of course, and you can also go on my YouTube channel and I dive into it, in terms of how the Eagles use their run pass option and where they use it on the field, because it's kind of a situational call for them. They're probably the best example of the RPO this season, just because what they did under Nick Foles. Mm-hmm. But the Eagles, how they were using their RPOs was, if you kind of divide the field up into 5 20-yard segments, they were using RPOs between the 20 and 40-yard lines on both sides of the field. Because for them, they see RPOs as like, the easy way to get yards. It's not going to be a big gain, but it's a reliable way to get yards. So if they want to move into the zones of the field where they can score, whether it be deep shots from the middle or into the red zone, they use these RPOs to kind of safely get across those no man's land parts of the field where they can actually be more aggressive. In terms of how they function, it's kind of it's almost like a too high versus single high read. If you see 2 high safeties, that means you're probably going to have a light box, meaning if you've got 3 wide receivers out there, you got 5 offensive linemen, you're going to have 5 people in the box if there's 2 high safeties. If you have 5 on 5, that's really good numbers for the run, because that means that they have to either defeat a block at the point of attack or just somehow make a play 5 on 5 if you get a hat on a hat. If they drop a safety down, now it's 6 versus 5 in the box, and it's unfavorable numbers against the run. But since it's a single high safety, now you're going to be looking to pass somewhere in a one-on-one situation. In a one-on-one situation. So the run pass option is basically a numbers game. You're counting how many defenders are in the box. You're reading them during the snap. And if the box is heavy, you pass it. If the box is light, you run it. And that's the simplest way to describe it, at least in this medium.
It's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, the Eagles used a whole bunch of different wrinkles for it, and I dive into that in my video. But the good thing is that Mitchell Trubisky ran those kind of plays at North Carolina all the time, so he's very comfortable with it. They weren't quite the same as how Oregon does their RPOs, but it's not so different that I don't think he couldn't pick it up in one offseason. I think Helfrich can work with him in terms of the background he comes from under Chip Kelly, and Trubisky should be able to read their style of RPOs probably pretty fine just by next year.
The biggest thing for Trubisky, I'm assuming, will be mechanics working through it. I mean, like you just noted, the scheme wise, he's already familiar more or less.
Yeah. And here's another thing is like how different teams do their RPOs. They might have the quarterback's feet positioned differently. Some might have even footing, some might drop the right foot, some might drop the left foot. How they handle the ball off the snap, different. It's just kind of little mechanical differences. They might train them to read inside out or outside in. It's just very little minor things that, if he's already familiar with RPOs, which he is, it'll be fine. He can kind of work through these little differences in one offseason. So that kind of gives him an advantage. But it's just little things that Helfrich's going to have to work with him on to kind of get him on the same page for how he wants it executed.
Let's talk about the running backs. So let's start with Jordan Howard. How is this offense and this offense's versatility going to help him? He's noted as this guy that works very well out of the shotgun. Been working well not this year really, because the Bears offense was incredibly predictable, but he works well out of the shotgun. He's a good zone runner. He's a patient runner. He's a powerful runner. How will this help him get back to probably more of the Jordan Howard of 2016?
I think if you're a Bears fan, if you just go watch Royce Freeman from like 2015 to 2016 in the Oregon offense, they're basically the same player. Helfrich will use Jordan Howard the exact same way because they're basically the same player. Not the fastest, but they've got better feet than you think. They've got size, power, vision, all that kind of stuff. And so I think they're going to use him out of the shotgun. They might go under center a little bit, but primarily they'll be in the shotgun and probably in the pistol a little bit, which is fine with Howard. And he's going to be used as that kind of inside zone, pound it between the tackles. If you give him a light box and you square him up one-on-one, he's going to run over you and probably get those easy 4 to 5 yard gains and just keep everything on schedule. Meanwhile, you got Tariq Cohen as kind of the spark plug. That's when you look at guys under Helfrich like Kenyon Barner, DeAnthony Thomas, that were these hybrid excuse me, oh god, my throat. These hybrid receiver running backs that, you know, you can even line them up together in the backfield just to kind of play games with alignment and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be really fun to watch because their styles are so different. But all of these coaches have used these running back by committees before. So they're all very familiar with how to use these guys. That we didn't really see it last year. But I think all these new coaches coming in, they know how to use scat backs. They know how to use these downhill runners inside. I think it's going to be great for both of them because they both fit this offense. And at least for fantasy purposes, I'm probably going to be very high on both of them next year because I think this offense fits both of them very well.
Yeah, a lot of people wanted to I was going to dispel this. A lot of people want to compare Cohen because it's the easy comparison, Tyreek Hill. I don't see that. He's exactly like you just said. He's DeAnthony Thomas. He's Kenyon Barner. I'm interested in what you think of him as a receiver, if, say, they split him out or if they have him in the slot. Because even Dowell Loggins had that. They just weren't necessarily creative concepts.
I think when you look at Cohen, those kind of RPOs off of motion that we see Philadelphia running a lot, that we see Kansas City running a lot, I think he's going to be a nightmare to cover on those, especially if they do a two-back set with Howard and Cohen. You can kind of put him in like a full house and then flex Cohen out to the slot and do an RPO from that. Because I don't think there's a single linebacker in the league that can keep up with him in space. So if he's your first pass option on these RPOs, if you have like a screen on one side, on the backside with Howard running front side, if you give them the choice about having Cohen covered one-on-one in space and you don't have that extra safety over there to help him, that's a touchdown. So I think we're going to see a lot of that next year in terms of putting both of them on the field in these RPOs and having it less be a run-pass option and more of a Howard Cohen option. That's going to be really fun to watch.
Terrifying prospect for defenses. So I don't think Oregon necessarily factored in tight ends much during Helfrich's time, but but Matt Nagy will, and the Bears assuredly will want to invest into their 2017 second-round pick, Adam Shaheen. What's his place in this offense? How is he going to factor in?
He is probably going to be used in a similar way to how the Chiefs use Kelsey and how the Eagles use Ertz, in that I can envision a scenario where Shaheen is the primary read on these safe RPOs more often than not. Because on the RPOs, especially if you're reading inside out, you want the quarterback to only have to read one spot. And so since Shaheen typically as a tight end is going to be lined up closer to the offensive line, whether he's in inline or if he's in like a nasty split or in the slot, whatever, if he's reading that inside linebacker, he being Trubisky, if he's reading that inside linebacker and he dives to try to shoot the gap and get to Howard, Shaheen's going to be the closest receiver to him, which means he's going to be the one open. So I think you're going to see a lot of seam routes with him, a lot of pop passes, a lot of slants, a lot of little things that in the short to intermediate pass game off these RPOs where he's just going to chunk people, for 10 to 15 yards on these quick passes because he's going to be the closest receiver to the read. So I don't know if he's going to put up the same numbers as Ertz or Kelsey in terms of touchdowns and, big chunk plays and everything like that. But I think he is going to be a very reliable receiver on these RPOs and probably break off plenty of big plays.
That's what I was going to note. He's not exactly the same athlete as Ertz or Kelsey, but what I'm gauging is that he's going to have the same amount of easy plays. So what's like for him, because he's a guy that he's of these four horsemen, he's the one that played the least by far. So what's going to be the biggest thing for him to take a next step to be comfortable in this offense as a tight end?
Well, it's something that I think he's already good at, which is not being afraid to take a hit. Because if you're in this offense, the spread coast offense, tight ends, they're working the middle of the field. That is their job. It's not like a Gronk or an Ertz situation where you can put them out as the X receiver and they're going to win on a sluggo against a safety and get a 40-yard touchdown. That's not the player he is. He's the guy that needs to be in between the hashes and just take the hit. He's going to have a safety hit him in the ribs. He's going to have a linebacker take a shot low on him. He needs to take that hit And I think he will take that hit, but that's going to be his job, is just get beat up and get first downs. And I think he can do that.
Perfect. So this is a guy that a lot of people have, I mean, not only have they forgotten about him, but an ACL tear in last year's preseason kind of had him go by the wayside. Cameron Meredith, I think he's one of the more underrated receivers in the league. I think he's poised for a solid rebound. Is he capable of kind of being that receiver on the flanker drives? Not necessarily, not even close to Jerry Rice's level, but is he capable of being that guy where you can rely on him in that way?
You know, it's interesting. I really liked the offense that the Bears had on paper last year, at least schematically. I felt like their personnel at the beginning of last season, at least in the preseason, fit what they were trying to do really well in terms of kind of being that almost Shanahan, Kubiak inspired, lots of bootlegs, lots of rollouts, having Meredith be that number one receiver that you can rely on for a crossing route. I felt like everything fit until Meredith got hurt, because their system last year would not work without having that one guy, that number one receiver that you can put in the X spot to win off the line of scrimmage and just get open. And Meredith was that guy to me. I really liked him as a receiver before he got hurt. I don't know if he's going to come back fully healthy this year. Maybe it'll take a year to fully recover. I don't know. But I thought he was a really underrated, true number one wide receiver. And once he went down, the whole offense went down. It did not matter who was playing quarterback. His absence completely destroyed everything that they were planning on doing schematically. So I'm not sure how he's going to fit into this spread coast offense, because, number one versus number two, it's kind of a fluid situation from week to week, because they don't really do that because they're not fully West Coast. West Coast is the system where it's really like, here's your number one, here's your number two, here's your number three. But spread offenses don't work that way. It's not really here's the guy. So I think Meredith's involvement will depend on how much they want to skew towards West Coast and how much they want to skew towards spread. And we won't really know that until next year. But on their West Coast inspired plays, I think he can be very effective, because he can be that true number one.
So what I'm gauging here is you're saying the Bears would have made the playoffs with Cameron Meredith. That's what I'm hearing, Brett. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I wouldn't have put them out of the realm for like 7 to 8 wins if they had Meredith, because I really like their defense, and then everybody on defense got hurt too. But I really like their defense, and I really like their interior offensive line on paper. Obviously love Howard and Cohen. Looking at Trubisky in the preseason, I thought he was looking really good. I didn't really agree that Glennon should have started, but it is what it is. And obviously I really like Meredith, and Kevin White wasn't even hurt yet at this point either. So I thought Kevin White might have been able to eventually develop into a number two. So, on paper, the Bears were a lot better than their record ended up. It's just everybody kept getting hurt. So it's not really something they can control. If everybody stays healthy this season and they have a good draft, a good free agency, and they're able to kind of blend these offensive concepts together well in year one, I'm not putting them completely out of a wild card race here, because they have a lot more talent than people think.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second as far as fits. So the offensive line, you just noted the interior. It's kind of more in flux this year. Josh Sitton may or may not be returning. Kyle Long has had a few surgeries. The Bears don't know where they're going to put Cody Whitehair, if he's going to be a center or guard. They might be replacing Bobby Massey at right tackle. So there's really a lot of questions. Luckily, they have one of the better offensive line coaches in Harry Heastan. But I wanted to figure how the offense will help an offensive line that will clearly be getting together or more than likely be like kind of still meshing in summer camp. How will the offense help them get comfortable?
Well,
if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, and again, it might come back to how heavily they lean on the spread versus how heavily they lean on the West Coast, because in the spread passing game, the ball's coming out in 2 seconds or less. So you don't necessarily have to have the best pass protectors in a pure spread offense, because the ball's coming out so quick that pass rushers aren't going to get there anyway. I'm not saying that that you're okay to have bad pass protectors, because obviously everything's easier when you have good ones, but it's not super crucial that everybody hold up for 4 seconds in a spread passing game, because the ball's not going to be there anymore. The West Coast, though, you do need to have good pass protectors, because some of these intermediate to deep route concepts in a West Coast offense, the ball's going to be in the quarterback's hands for 4 or 5 seconds. So you have to hold up. So, when I said we might not know what we're seeing until week 1, how good the offensive line is at pass protecting will be the thing that determines whether or not we see more West Coast or more spread. If they can hold up, we'll probably see more West Coast. If they can't, we'll probably see more spread. So whatever group they have in camp, on paper, if you think they're a good pass protecting team, you can probably expect more West Coast stuff.
There's not really, you wouldn't necessarily put too much stock into left or right tackle either. If you're a good pass protecting team, you'd want both to be good to be able to do the West Coast, I assume, correct?
Yeah, especially left tackle, because, if you cannot have Mitchell Trubisky holding the ball for 5 seconds with a bad left tackle if you've got an edge rusher coming off his blind side. That's a recipe for a sack fumble every day of the week. So if they do want to do, those double releases or, the scissor concepts deep downfield, if they want to do that, they better make sure their left tackle can hold up, whoever that is.
It's more than likely going to be Charles Leno, but a lot of people still have questions. I just wanted to clarify and and figure that. Let's do this little thing. We're going to go through all free agency, offensive fits, and the draft. So, as far as wide receivers and free agency, before we start talking about names, what are specific traits that Nagy's offense will probably look for in guys? How they're implemented?
The ability to create by themselves. Doesn't matter how big they are, how fast they are, how shifty they are. They need to create by themselves, meaning if you're a jump ball receiver, you better be open even when you're not open. If you're a scat back or if you're a slot receiver, if you get the ball in space, you better be able to make a guy miss. Whatever your thing is, your physical trait is, you better be really good at it. It's not a well-rounded type of thing. Everybody's kind of got their role. Everybody's got their skill set and what they're good at. And this is a coaching staff that's going to be looking at what you're good at and using it to the max. Doesn't matter if you can do everything. You need to be able to at least do one thing really well. So you look at Tariq Cohen, who's kind of like that hybrid. He's really good in space, so they're going to use that. Cameron Meredith, I think, is really good as a physical kind of box you out receiver. He's not the fastest guy, but I think if he's running inside on a slant, you can trust him to win inside and box the corner out and be that really good possession receiver. They're going to use that. Kevin White supposedly is a 4-3 receiver. I don't know if he's 4-3 anymore.
I don't think so.
I don't know if he can run that fast anymore, but if he can, he better be able to be that good deep threat.
Right.
Whatever you do well, you have to do really well. So in terms of the roles that we're looking to fill, there's rumors about them going for Emmanuel Sanders in terms of getting that shifty slot receiver that can also win deep. If they want Sanders better be able to get open, because as a slot receiver, that's his job. He doesn't need to be a true deep threat. He doesn't need to be a red zone threat. He needs to just get open. That's the thing. Just whatever you're good at, be really good at it.
How much do you factor into just pure speed or quickness as, like, aside from being good at your primary role? How much do you factor in that for the receiver here? Because
obviously you want everybody to be fast. But
right.
But
a lot of people have been knocking, like, say, Jarvis Landry. Like, for me, for example, because he's not exactly the guy that's going to take a defense. He's not going to stretch a defense by any means. And he's not back when he was drafted, his combine numbers and athletic profile weren't less than. They were less than desired, especially for what typically Andy Reid and his disciples look for. So, how much stock do you put into that?
The athletic profile maybe was less than desirable, but we have 4 years of tape on him that show that the thing that he's good at, which is breaking tackles in space, he's really freaking good at it.
Yeah.
So again, that would be his role, and they would use that to the max with screens and other kind of design plays, whether it's end around sweeps, whatever. He's really good at breaking tackles on the edge, and so that's what they would use him for. And that's the kind of player that they're looking for, is just somebody with a skill set that they can build around, something that they know without a doubt he can do.
So, okay, so we just discussed Landry and Sanders. Of these other names, Marquise Lee, Albert Wilson, and Paul Richardson. And then Allen Robinson, although I think he's going to get tagged by Jacksonville. Of those four names, who intrigued you the most for the Bears?
Definitely Allen Robinson, because he's that really good X-receiver that they would love to have in a West Coast offense. I obviously still like Cameron Meredith as an X, but Allen Robinson is one of the best X's in the whole NFL.
Yeah.
Just big, physical, strong, win at the line of scrimmage against press, out jump people for the ball down the boundary. He is a do-it-all number one wide receiver, and it's unfortunate that he hasn't had a quarterback that can really use him for most of his career.
Oh, that's Blake Bortles slander, Brett. Come on.
Oh, don't tell me you're a Blake Bortles apologist.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, God. I was about ready to leave this podcast. But, Allen Robinson might actually be one of the few exceptions to the have one skill and be really good at it thing, because he's really good at everything, so it doesn't even matter. So, if you have one of those rare receivers that can be both a speed threat and a possession receiver and be really good at getting yards after catch, that's great. But those are very hard to find, and Robinson happens to be one of them.
That'd be the ideal. Maybe we'll see how that plays out. As far as offensive line fits and misfits, so there are two names that I kind of narrowed down. Andrew Norwell, so he's a first-team All-Pro. It's kind of going to depend on what happens with Josh Sitton and company, and then Nate Solder. So how will they factor into this attack?
I personally don't think that the Bears are going to go after either one of them. I think if they want to either stabilize or improve or just kind of tread water on the offensive line, they'll probably do it through the draft. I feel if they're going to use any of their money, let's just have a scenario where Allen Robinson is not tagged. If they want to use their money, they'll probably use it on Robinson. They'll have to outbid the Niners. They'll have to outbid pick a team that wouldn't want Robinson, to be honest. Yeah. They'll have to outbid the Browns. So I don't know how much money the Bears have, but they'll probably have to use most and or all of it if they want to get Robinson. And this is a better offensive line class this year than it was last year. So I think they have a better shot of revamping the offensive line in the draft. So if they want to do that, if they want to go that route, that's probably what they'll do, is they'll probably just get rookies.
We'll talk offensive line in a minute. Tight end misfits in free agency. Trey Burton, Jimmy Graham, Tyler Eifert. So these guys would maybe even Graham's case kind of take snaps from Shaheed, but it's still a possibility. I'm having it in consideration as more of a compliment, as more like a number 2 or move tight end.
Yeah, is none an option?
None? Really?
Yeah, Eifert can't stay healthy. So any money put into him, I'm not comfortable with in the first place. Okay. Just because I can't trust him to actually play. Right. Graham, I think, no matter what, is going to be priced way out of consideration. Right. Because he and his agent are going to ask for way too much money because he's Jimmy Graham. Trey Burton, maybe, but I've never really been super enthusiastic about him. I think a better route would probably be looking for like a Dallas Goedert in the second round or third round if he's still there. Maybe like a Mark Andrews, Mike Gesicki as you're looking for like a number 2 tight end. He's come a long way in Penn State. 3 years ago, I didn't think he was going to be drafted. And now as a senior, he's looking like a legit NFL prospect. So I think, again, it's another thing where if you're going to spend the money, you're probably not going to spend it at tight end. You're probably going to spend it at receiver. So you might as well draft one.
How important is it to have multiple tight ends in Nagy's scheme? And you've seen more of a dominant guy like Ertz or Kelsey, but how important is it to have that complementary guy?
Just looking at Helfrich and Nagy, they didn't really use multiple tight end sets in their previous destinations that much. Oregon, I can't remember the last time they ran a 2 tight end set. I don't watch every Oregon game, but
you'd see them in passing. You'd see them in passing.
Yeah. And again, in Oregon, tight ends were basically used as that chunk threat in the seams. They were never the number one option, let alone having two of them on the field. I mean, God, they were never even under center, so why would they be having two on the field? The Chiefs, back when they had Anthony Fasano, would have two tight end sets every now and then, but that wasn't really their thing. Again, it was three wide receivers and Travis Kelce, who was basically just a bigger wide receiver that could block. So I don't think it's super important that they have two good tight ends. I think Shaheen is enough. And if they want to either get a backup as insurance or, maybe if they want a tight end with a little bit of a different skill set, they can look for one in the draft, but it's not super critical.
Interesting. Okay. That was a big conversation point. Let's jump over to the draft now. So, if the Bears, I would expect them to probably still take a young guy, even if they invest heavily in free agency at receiver. But of these names, pick two: Calvin Ridley, Courtland Sutton, Christian Kirk, Kike Kute, DJ Moore, Anthony Miller, Sammy Cobbs Jr., and Dante Pettis. Pick two of those.
Calvin Ridley is a really interesting prospect. He's not the biggest guy, but he's so refined. So he's kind of like that do-it-all kind of guy, except he doesn't really have the size of Meredith. Again, I think this all comes back to what they do in free agency in terms of what roles they fill in their receiving core with free agents. But just in a vacuum right now, as the receiving core stands now, I would probably lean towards Courtland Sutton because I'm a sucker for big jump ball receivers. And I've loved Sutton. I was actually really surprised he didn't come out last year. I thought he could have been a first-round pick last year. But he's just big, long, 6'4", throw it up in his zip code and he'll go get it kind of guy. I'm a really big fan of his. And there's another guy who wasn't on that list, Equinemius St. Brown.
Yes, I should have been.
Who I think is a very intriguing option. Again, another one of those big, long. He's got a little bit more speed than Sutton, but I think he can kind of fill that open when he's not open kind of role. So those are two receivers that I would look at for them. If they want Sutton, they'll probably have to take him in the first round unless they trade down. Brown or St. Brown might be there in the second round. Not 100% sure, but that's an option if they want to look maybe at Quentin Nelson in the first round. So they have options in the draft, but it will all come down to which roles they fill in March. Right.
Well, we're doing this in a vacuum. So as much as I don't like to do that either. I think in the case of St. Brown, just purely out of X, he'd be perfect for Chicago sports radio in terms of people never getting his name right. So.
His two. I'm actually familiar with his family. His two younger brothers played and are still playing at my high school alma mater down in Southern California. And it's a great family. Each one of these kids is basically geniuses. I mean, they're all really smart, really hardworking. I think he would fit into the culture that they want to build in Chicago very well. You really can't go wrong with him, in my opinion. The production wasn't there in college, but it wasn't really his fault just because his quarterback situation was never that great. And outside of the Deshaun Kaiser games where Kaiser decided to be good. But he's a really intriguing prospect, and I'm rooting for him.
Definitely. We just touched that in a little bit again. Offensive line fits and misfits. So you said Nelson. So in addition to Nelson, I think he would be the obvious guy. So of everyone else, let's say Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, Mike McGlinchey, Will Hernandez, Tyrell Crosby, Alex Kappa, and Desmond Harrison.
For me, I lean towards McGlinchey because of the program he comes from, and his offensive line coach now happens to be in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But you look at Notre Dame, and they are either one of the or the best offensive line factory in college football, or at least they have been the last 5 years. The amount of talent that they have put into the league at every position on the offensive line, doesn't matter if it's tackle, guard, or center, they have put out great NFL players at every position in the last 5 years.
Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, for those who...
Both of the Martin brothers. Both of them.
Yeah, actually Nick Martin too, yes. You're correct.
So, they have a consistent track record of pumping out talent that is both athletically gifted and technically refined. McGlinchey is not as physically gifted as Ronnie Stanley, but I think he can be a consistent option at tackle, whether or not you want to. I mean, you mentioned replacing Bobby Massey. I think he could make the switch to right tackle. It'll probably take him an offseason to retrain his feet, but I think he could very easily do that. So that would be, to me, the number one tackle you look at, just because of the program he's coming from, the fact that he has a familiarity with the offensive line coach, and C, I think he is physically gifted enough to make that switch.
And he'd probably be a late first to early second, I'm assuming.
He would be probably a trade down target. Yeah.
Trade down. Okay. So I don't know that if the Bears will necessarily target a running back, but let's say they want a nice stable of tailbacks the way Philadelphia had, Corey Kollman and Jay Ajayi and LeGarrette Blount. So as far as running backs misfits, I only put a few names here. If there's someone else, as we did last time, feel free to mention it. Kalen Ballage, Akram Wadley, Justin Jackson, Ryan Nall, and Kyle Hicks.
I love Kalen Ballage. Okay. I love him. I don't know if the Bears are going to take him because he might be kind of taken in the range of the draft that's above where they want to fill out their running back rotation.
Right.
But I freaking love this kid. I really do. I mean, he's big. He is physical. He runs with hate in his heart. I'm a huge fan of his. And
I like that descriptor.
Yeah, he's great. I love him. He is stylistically, I guess you can call him similar to Jordan Howard because they both run with a lot of power. But
he's a better receiver.
He's a better receiver. Definitely a better receiver. And if Howard gets hurt, I mean, knock on wood, if he gets hurt, do they have another guy that can run in that style? I personally don't think they do.
Yeah.
So, maybe they look at somebody like a Ballage as an insurance if Howard gets hurt, because that's not a guy that you can just replace with a free agent off the street. You need to have a plan already in place. And considering how important it is for the run game in this offense, and you look at Nagy when he was in Kansas City, he ran the ball less than 30 times once when he was calling the plays in Kansas City. So the run game is extremely important to him. And Helfrich comes from the Chip Kelly tree. And Kelly said, I run it on 3rd and 9 just for fun. And he wasn't lying. I mean, they do. So the run game is extremely important in this offense. So you better have an investment in the people that are actually carrying the ball. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go running back maybe a little bit earlier than we expect. And if they do, Ballage is a good target for that.
Perfect. He's the kind of guy I've centered in on as well. I just wasn't sure if he was the exact perfect fit. It'd be nice to have another endorsement. So before we get to the mailbag isn't necessarily extensive. There was an interesting Twitter conversation, and I want to just put you on the spot. So let's compare a few guys just as independent from the Bears. Just this is NFL talk in general. Comparing a few guys from other eras and how they would fare athletically. So who are guys from maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s that you'd think that were Hall of Famers or considered superstars that wouldn't translate well now? Who comes to mind for you is the first question. That wouldn't translate now to 2018. I know that's kind of a crapshoot because you can't really compare guys from eras with nutrition and athletic progression, but still.
I think any Patriots offense from the last probably 10 years would put up 60 points on the steel curtain.
Damn.
Easy.
Okay.
Easy. Easy. I mean, not even close. It would be a massacre. They have, especially if they had to play by today's rules. I mean, if we put that qualifier in there, but just from a pure physical talent perspective, the steel curtain, the linebackers in those days were not covering running backs in space like James White.
Yeah.
They were not covering slot receivers like Danny Amendola or Julian Edelman. Lord knows they were not covering anything that looked remotely like Randy Moss.
Yeah.
And they were not playing against a quarterback like Tom Brady. They would get absolutely annihilated. Completely annihilated. I mean, there's certain defensive linemen that transcend era, like, Reggie White and all that kind of stuff, but there is no way that any defense from the 70s, even the great Bears defenses from the mid-80s, they would get shredded by any Tom Brady-led offense from the last 10 years. And it's not like, saying that they weren't good. They were great. But today's athletes and today's schemes are so far beyond anything that was around 30 years ago that it wouldn't even be close.
Yeah, so Laura, my entire life or football following life, I always and for according to his time, he was. But I always thought of Lawrence Taylor as this freak, and you see him walk around, how huge he was. I think it might have been the pads from the '80s. He was actually only 6'3", 237. Like, he'd be one of the smallest outside linebackers in 2018. He wouldn't be big at all. Like, he'd be like an average player.
Yeah, he'd be Levante David.
He'd be Levante David, like a better Levante David.
Well, I'll say that he definitely hell of a lot more athletic and hell of a lot more instinctual than Levante David, but just size wise, dimension wise, he's basically Levante David.
Or like,
yeah, so it's totally different eras. I mean, I still think Lawrence Taylor would be great. I think he would basically be like Von Miller, maybe slightly smaller than Von Miller, but he'd basically be Von Miller in today's game. I mean, they're both first ballot Hall of Famers, so you can't really go wrong. But I think Lawrence Taylor, in particular, was basically what would happen if you put Von Miller of today into the NFL 30 years ago, and how dominant he was would be how dominant Von Miller is if he also did the same thing.
There was another one. You know how big Walter Payton was? 5'11", 200. That's James White. That's essentially
Walter's another guy that I think, though, he could probably survive today too, because I think he was a rare precursor to what the running back would eventually become. Very rare. He and Barry Sanders and Earl Campbell are like the three running backs I can think of that are era proof, but only because they were so athletically gifted that by any era's standard, they would be gifted. Any era. But it's very hard to find any players that played in the 70s or 80s that fit that description. And that's why they were so dominant. That's why Barry Sanders and Walter Payton, were both top 3 in rushing ever when they left, is because they were so far more athletic than everyone else on the field. Whereas by today's standards, they would still be very athletic, but maybe not the most athletic.
Yeah, they'd be more like top 10 backs than like the superstars of back when they played. I was thinking of one-on-one matchups from my perspective. One I thought of was Julio Jones against Hall of Fame corner Dick LeBeau. Could you imagine that?
Julio would put up 400 yards.
Julio would break every NFL receiving. Julio would have 30 receptions. More like you could just feed him over and over, and he would be open every play. Like,
if you thought Megatron putting up 300 in 2013 was bad, just wait until Julio plays against the 1955 Detroit Lions.
Yeah. Aside from the running backs, I don't think any. Who's a quarterback you think that could translate over? I don't think necessarily Joe Montana would. I think Joe Montana would be killed.
Dan Marino.
Dan Marino probably. He was a physical freak. That's who I had.
Dan Marino, maybe John Elway. God, who else? Probably Brett Favre, just because he did start playing.
Brett Favre's closer to this era. Though.
Well, he played for so long that even early Brett Favre kind of blends over into the older era. But he had such a great arm that he could play any time he wanted to. God, who's like in the top 10 a quarter? Would you count Steve Young?
I compare, and I don't know if you'd agree. I actually would, because I compare Steve Young to Mitch Trubisky, just less mechanically polished, but just
kind of that junkyard football kind of
how he runs, how he plays, like just relying on his legs off, and that's kind of how Trubisky was. I've seen so far.
Improvisational, but it ends up working out kind of quarterback.
Yeah, definitely.
I can see that.
Okay, so I will give you a moment, but give me a one-on-one matchup that you just did that's just where a modern player would destroy an older era player. So I gave you LeBeau versus Jones. So give me a modern era matchup like that.
Oh man, a modern era matchup.
A modern great player versus an older era player where the modern guy would just destroy them, or make it as creative as possible, whatever comes to mind.
Oh man,
I'll give you a moment.
Oh man, that's tough. Let me see. Who is? How about this? Let's narrow it down. Give me a position versus a position.
I'll give you criteria. So you can go like a pass rusher chasing after a quarterback. Like a quarterback with pocket presence. You can go running back against linebacker. You can go or linebacker chasing down a quarterback. You can go receiver against corner. You can go pass rusher against tackle or pass rusher against interior. You can go stuff like that. I would probably not safeties. Safeties don't really have one-on-one matchups, so probably not that.
Okay, how about this? Danny Woodhead against Mike Singletary.
Oh man, I mean,
in space.
Oh,
Danny
God.
Woodhead would destroy Mike Singletary.
And Danny Woodhead's what, he's a scat back in today's age.
How about this? Le'Veon Bell against Mike Singletary in space would not be close.
Oh my God,
would not be close.
That's the first ballot Hall of Famer, probably. Oh God, I can't even.
But Mike Singletary, he wasn't. They didn't have to do that back then.
Yeah. He was
a come downhill, smash you in the face kind of linebacker. Now, if they're running a gap run up the gut, sure, I'll take Singletary because that's what he was great at. But if he has to cover Le'Veon Bell on a slant route in his prime, not even close. Would not be close.
Someone actually had fun with a Bears linebacker too. Dick Butkus trying to get Michael Vick in the flat, like Michael Vick in his prime.
No, that's
like Brian Urlacher was able to do that, but Dick Butkus, no way.
But Brian Urlacher also was a safety in college. So.
Yeah, that's it. He's much more of an athlete. All right, I think a lot of the mailbag questions we actually had was why I nixed it were concerning the free agency. So I think that to wrap it up, I mean, do you have anyone else that you could think of as like a one final matchup as a fun one? And debate with me, and then we can we can nix this completely.
Let's see. Who is? Let me look at the top 10 sack leaders of all time, and I'll tell you how many of the top 10 I think Tyron Smith would beat. A healthy Tyron Smith. Bruce Smith and Reggie White, I think, would probably be an even battle against a healthy Tyron Smith. Kevin Green, Tyron would win. Julius Peppers, that's probably a push. Chris Dolman, Tyron. Strahan, Tyron. Jason Taylor,
I think Jason Taylor would beat Tyron Smith.
Just so freaking long. DeMarcus Ware.
DeMarcus Ware is more modern era, too.
He's already in the top 8. Crap. Wow. Richard Dent, Tyron. John Randall, defensive tackle doesn't count. Jared Allen, Tyron. John Abraham, Tyron. Lawrence Taylor, Tyron. Leslie O'Neal, Tyron. I'm in the top 15 now. Ricky Jackson, Tyron. Derek Thomas. I'd probably go Thomas.
Derek Thomas he's like Reggie White. Yeah, he probably is the best first step of all time. And that's still like 20 years old now. Over 20 years old now.
Yeah. Terrell Suggs and Dwight Freeney, both in their prime, would probably be an even matchup. Mathis, I'd go Tyron. Simeon Rice, Tyron. So that's over half of the top 20 sack leaders of all time, and I think Tyron Smith would absolutely kill them.
Yeah.
People are freaks these days, man. It's totally different.
It's unreal the jumps. It's unreal the jumps the league has made. It's just like a funny way to keep everything in perspective.
It's an arms race. It's a complete arms race.
Definitely. All right, that should just about wrap up this episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. Brett, thanks for hopping on. You can follow Brett on Twitter at Brett Kollman. He writes, as I noted to start the show, for SB Nation's Battle Red blog, which is the Houston Texans website. And you can also see all of his work, more of his additional work on his YouTube channel, youtube.com, and just under the slash, you put his name, Brett Kollman. You'll find him. You'll see that on his Twitter. Brett, really appreciate the insight, the X's and O perspective, that fun little conversation at the end. Great to have you, man.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. Follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. We'll keep these going as the off season continues to roll along and we have a better picture, guys. But other than that, as always, stay classy.